Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, military detention with no right to trial. We'll examine the legacy of Japanese internment camps and ask, could history repeat itself? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is fielding all of your comments on this issue. So during the show, tweet her. Use the hashtag AJStream. Malika, it might not be specifically with our community, but more broadly, there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the National Defense Authorization Act and internment camps.
And one way to bridge that gap could be the pictures that I pulled up here on my screen. People are sharing these photos as a remembrance to the Japanese Americans who were interned. This one is a former internment camp in California, and here's another one from Vanessa, who uses the hashtag Let It Not Happen Again. So for those of you at home, we want you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts with the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us in studio is Korematsu. She is the daughter of the late civil rights activist Fred Korematsu, whose story we're going to hear more about during the program. She's also the founder of the Fred T. Korematsu Institute for Civil Rights and Education. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Pleasure.
So, do you have a story that you want us to cover? Or maybe there's an issue that's important to you? Let us know by sending us a Facebook idea. You can drop us a line at facebook.com/AJStream. It's one way for you to be part of the stream.
I'm Jamal Bowie. I'm a staff writer with the American Prospect magazine, and I am in the street.
Indefinite detention without due process. That is what nearly 120,000 U.S. residents of Japanese ancestry had to endure for up to 4 years during World War II. Months after the 1941 Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt signed an executive order that cleared the way for the forced relocation of Japanese Americans into internment camps. They had to give up their homes and their livelihoods, and although the majority of internees were U.S. citizens, they were not notified of their charges, nor did they have the right to a trial. Now the descendants of Japanese Americans who challenged the internment order are arguing that past wrongs could be repeated through the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, and its provision for the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens. So, could history repeat itself? And what lessons has the U.S. learned from Japanese internment? Joining us to discuss this is Mary Muramaki. She's a former Japanese-American internee. As a teenager, Mary lived at the Topaz internment camp in Utah. She joins us from Washington, D.C. And in Virginia is Carl Mayer. He is one of the attorneys currently challenging the constitutionality of the NDAA's provision on indefinite detention. Carl and Mary, welcome to you both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fletcher. Appreciate your having us on.
We're pleased to have you both here. Mary, I want to start with you. You know, tomorrow marks the 71-year anniversary of the authorization of internment camps in the U.S., and you were one of those 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry that was sent to a camp. You were a teenager at the time. How did the government explain why you and your family were being sent there?
Actually, there was no explanation. We found out that Executive Order 9066, the order that would put us into the camps, they were just posted on telephone poles. The telephone poles became one of the most important things in our lives during that period of time.
And once these notices were posted on the telephone poles, tell us what life was like. I mean, were families frantically running around trying to gather their things? What of your possessions, if any, were you able to take with you? What was the process like?
Well, the process was, once the notice was posted, I want to interrupt. That's my family getting into the bus. There's my sister, and the only one missing was my younger sister. She must have already gotten on the bus. We were going to Tanfran. That film is used all in various films, and they have our family leaving from Los Angeles and different places, but actually we were leaving from San Francisco.
And you left everything behind?
Yes. The Executive Order 9066 that was posted stated that you could only take what you could carry. Therefore, we had to get rid of everything else. There were people going through, I was at that time living in Japanese town, so there were men going through the town and they were taking orders if you wanted to sell your furniture. My parents sold the whole household of furniture to them, but what happened was they sold our piano the next day in front of us for what they had paid for all of our furniture. The thing that made things very difficult during that time was after Executive Order 9066 was posted, the curfew notices were posted. Those started out in so many miles away from your home, and by the time our orders came to go to Tampa and Racetrack, it was within so many blocks. So my father couldn't go to work. My sister couldn't go to work, and my brother couldn't go to high school, and I couldn't go to middle school.
Essentially held hostage. Karen, talk about the impact that these internment camps had on Japanese Americans, not just as individuals, but on the entire Japanese American community.
Well, it was a terrible time, and the atmosphere was such that the Japanese were being demonized, and you would see posters, propaganda posters, showing how people, a Japanese man had a knife in his hand, and so it was a very atmosphere of also being afraid, because people didn't know where they were going to be going. They weren't, as Mary said, they had these notices that went up on the telephone poles. And I always felt very sad for my grandmother, who was an immigrant from Japan, thinking, that she had worked so hard to raise a family and build a business with my grandfather. They had a flower nursery business in East Oakland, California, and to lose everything and not know where you were going to go.
And of course, not just the fear that it created within the Japanese American community, but of course the fear that it created among other Americans of Japanese Americans.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, Mary, our community has lots of questions for you. Of course, you were a teenager when your family was forced to move into the camp in Utah. So Deepak on Twitter says, how were internees treated, and were families allowed to stay together? Could you tell us your story?
Yes, at the beginning, when the rumors were going around, before we were put into the assembly center, one of the rumors was that the children would be separated from the family, and my father and mother believed that rumor, so they went to the photo studio and had their picture taken, and they gave their picture to all 5 of us children, and I do have that picture to this day. And this is why the rumors weren't stifled at all, because the communication from the government was our telephone poles and notices in front of storefronts.
Mary, you've said that the children in the internment camps would complain about being there, and the parents would say, this is what the government wants, we need to make the best of it. Why do you think people didn't revolt?
Because I think it's because of our Japanese ancestry. Our parents taught us whatever the government does, they're doing it for our good, and the government is always right. And so we went into those camps knowing that things would be difficult, but our parents kept telling us in Japanese, shikata ga nai, which meant things do happen and you don't have any control over, and do whatever the government tells you. And if things get rough, just make the best of it.
Well, Karen, Deepak says, did any Japanese American group try going to the courts to stop the internment? And yes, what was the verdict? Now, of course, your father was one of those people. Can you explain to our audience what he did and why it was so significant?
Well, he, first of all, was born in Oakland, California, and therefore he thought of himself as an American citizen. And he learned about the Constitution in high school. So he thought he had civil rights, and clearly what had happened, as we talked about earlier, everyone's civil rights had been violated. At the time there were no hearings, there were no trials, and no due process. And everyone had a different way of demonstrating their citizenship. for a lot of the Japanese American people, of course, they went on to these concentration camps. But my father said, I'm an American, and I'm going to stay and work. But eventually he did get arrested at the end of May in 1942. And it was actually Mr. Ernest Bessick, the executive director then of the Northern California affiliate of the American Civil Liberties Union, that came to my father and said, would he take, he wanted to use a test case for the Supreme Court, if need be, would my father be willing? And he said yes.
Carl Mayer, I want to bring you in here. The National Defense Authorization Act includes a provision that allows the military to detain U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens without charges or a guarantee of trial. Do you see any parallels to be drawn between Japanese internment camps and this particular provision of the NDAA?
Yeah, I see parallels in the sense that this is the first statute, to our knowledge, that authorizes detention, even of U.S. citizens, by the U.S. military. We have a constitutional principle that's been in place for over 200 years, supposedly, that the military does not police the streets of the United States of America. That precept was violated during the era of Japanese internment, and one of the reasons we decided to go forward with this lawsuit, which is captioned Hedges versus Obama, is that we wanted to ensure that detention such as the internment during World War II never takes place in America again. And we were very honored in our court papers to have an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, filed by the Korematsu family, the Hirabayashi and the Matsui family. We're very honored to have them file those papers. Professor Benai at the Seattle Law School and Professor Yamamoto at Hawaii Law School also participated.
Carl,
I think,
I just want to jump in for just a second. You mentioned President Obama. I want you to take a listen to this interview from last year with President Obama. A Cincinnati-based reporter named Ben Swan asks the president why the government's lawyers are appealing the ruling against NDAA.
Number one, my first job is to keep the American people safe. Number two, we've got to do it in a way that respects our values and our traditions of rule of law. That's why I ban torture. That's why I've argued that we should actually close Guantanamo. But I've also said that, we've got some bad guys who are down there who we may not be able to try in a traditional court, but have pledged to try to hurt Americans. And so that's something that we inherited, that we're dealing with, and it's complicated. On the other hand, what I also said was a U.S. citizen can never be subject to that kind of detention. Congress disagreed with me, and I didn't want us to not be able to finance our military and pay our soldiers and our troops. So I signed the bill, but what I also said was, look, that I'm never going to use this power, and what I suspect is that the courts are going to agree with us over the long term that that is not something that you can use when it comes to U.S. citizens.
So, Carl, the president says he signed the bill, but he never intends to use the power. He thinks the courts are ultimately going to agree. But how confident are you, one, that it will never be used, and two, what prevents a future president from using it?
There's nothing preventing a future president from using it. We could have President Biden tomorrow, President McConnell the day after. We could, in any event, we'll have a different president in a little over 3 years. There is no bar to another president using it. President Obama's statements are not particularly sound, given that he promised that he would veto this legislation, the NDAA, or so-called Homeland Battlefield Act. He promised he would veto it and not sign it. Then he went ahead and he signed it. Then he went ahead and he had his Justice Department lawyers go ahead and fight our lawsuit to declare that U.S. citizens should never be subject to detention. And then, when they lost and we won and got an injunction, they had the Justice Department work over the weekend, 48 hours straight, and file an emergency appeal. And it's now up on appeal in the Second Circuit and may be headed to the Supreme Court.
But one has to wonder, I mean, the president is an expert in constitutional law, so don't you think he would be the first to object if this really was a grave violation of the U.S. Constitution?
He knows better. He should have objected. We've called upon him to drop the appeal, and he won't. And it's not directed at President Obama. President Bush was foursquare for this type of policy as well. And it's a bipartisan coalition in Congress that has authorized this detention. But the language in which they've done it is really remarkable. Senator Graham, who was the floor manager, Republican Senator Graham, said, if you're an American citizen and you help Al-Qaeda kill our people, and you say you want a lawyer, we say to you, shut up, you're not going to get a lawyer. Which means he's basically given the stiff arm to due process, just like we had detentions during World War II. And that's why we're fighting this battle. And, as many people support President Obama on this issue, the Native Americans in this country had an expression. They said, he speaks with forked tongue. And that's what he's doing. He's not being honest with the American people. If he were being forthright, he would either drop the appeal or he would have vetoed the legislation to begin with.
It's that link, Carl, between World War II and now that our community is picking up on, especially, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but especially this Obama comment has riled up members of our community. Jesse says, I don't think the U.S. has learned much. It's definitely not part of the current national dialogue, discourse, or thinking. Another tweet, this is what happens when you go to war against a word, terror, which with the right spin and legislation can mean anybody. And one more here from Tom Rizzo on our Google Plus page. He says, is it odd that the architects of Nazi Germany who survived the war were detained and put on trial, but anyone suspected of links to Al-Qaeda is just murdered whenever the opportunity presents itself? But Karen, I want to turn to you with this next one. This is a comment left from a Japanese American living in Japan. Have a listen.
Hi. As a Japanese American living in Japan, I know a thing or two about discrimination. The internment of Americans of Japanese origin was enacted in a climate of stereotyping and a perception that there was a prevailing clash of civilizations between the West and the Yellow Peril. In order to avoid a repeat of institutionalized suspicion and punishment based on profile, I think that the global community of social media should actively debunk stereotypical thinking, including the supposed clash of civilizations between the West and Islam.
So you mentioned that climate of stereotyping earlier. Would you see that same thing happening now?
Well, it has happened now, and I think that's the point of this discussion. That's what brings relevance to the Day of Remembrance tomorrow, on February 19th, which is the actual day when President Roosevelt issued this Executive Order 9066, which basically was a blank check given to the military to do as they wish. And that's the danger, again, here with the National Defense Authorization Act, is that, the president could give a blank check to, the military. And it's our courts that need to be the gatekeepers and to pay attention to these situations. That's why my father's story is so relevant and why his legacy keeps growing and why we have...
Germany posed a much graver existential threat to the United States than Al-Qaeda, which in any event is depleted and has lost its leadership today. And it's not comparable. There was a much greater existential threat during the 1950s and 60s when the Soviet Union had 50,000 plus nuclear warheads aimed at our country in an escalating Cold War. What's a greater existential threat? Is a criminal gang? I don't mean to diminish terrorism, but this country is now embarked in a war that by my count is 4,175 days old. It's almost a permanent war on terror. There's no end in sight. The administration hasn't said there's an end in sight, and yet we've turned the country completely upside down and in many respects eroded American civil liberties into fighting a war on terror. And this assault on our civil liberties has to stop. And detention is only one aspect of this. But in many respects, if you look at this bill, in some respects, it's even worse than the statute that was passed during World War II, because this statute allows not just detention, it allows the rendition of U.S. citizens and others to any foreign country or entity. So in other words, as an example, you could have U.S. citizens picked up and sent to authoritarian regimes overseas for disposition with their Secret Service, torture, whatever it is. So it's really a grave assault on our civil liberties.
You don't, and what's Carl's saying is you don't even need to look like the enemy before. I mean, that was really the preface in 1942. But I must say that Senator Dianne Feinstein last year did try to introduce an amendment that would protect American citizens and legal immigrants. Unfortunately, some of us didn't feel like it went far enough to protect everyone here on this soil. Nowhere. And it was the actually it was the Congressional Joint Reconstruction Committee that threw out her amendment. So she was trying to make the efforts to at least help this situation, and that's why why we're at risk here. I mean, our civil liberties, our civil rights are still at risk. And could it happen again? Some people don't think so. I think it could. Look what's happening in North Korea. With the nuclear weapons that they're testing these days. Anything could happen in this country, and at a drop of a hat, everything could change.
Karen, Sam agrees with you on Google+. He says, the repeating of history is definite proof that the majority of Americans do not regret the first time it occurred. I think, of course, that could be argued.
Yeah, well, that is a good note to leave this on, of course. If we don't pay attention to history, it repeats itself. We're going to pick up this discussion in our online post show. So to watch that, if you're not already there, log on to stream.aljazeera.com. Before we move that direction, though, Malika has a few other stories that the team is following.